Welcome, everyone, to LDEI Live Online. I'm Sheila Cry, Chair of the Live Online Committee, and we're delighted that you've joined us for today's program, Insights by Restaurant Industry Analyst. Restaurants continue to navigate a rapidly changing landscape shaped by economic pressures, shifting consumer behavior, labor challenges, technology, and evolving business models. Today, we're fortunate to have three of the industry's most respected observers and analysts helping us make sense of what is happening now and what may lie ahead. Before we begin, I'd like to invite LDEI President Marilyn Freundlich to say a few words about Les Dames d'Escoffier International and our mission.
Hello, everyone, and I'm glad that you're all here. Welcome. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to attend this really very current topic. And thanks again to our four speakers who are restaurant executives. As you all probably know, Les Dames d'Escoffier is a philanthropic women's organization of women in the food, beverage, and hospitality professions. We number about 2,800 members from all over the world. We have 40 chapters in the United States, Canada, the UK, Italy, and Mexico. We are delighted that you're here with us today. And I would say, Sheila, take it away. Looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Marilyn. Now it is my pleasure to introduce today's moderator, Alicia Kelso. Alicia is executive editor of Nation's Restaurant News and a widely respected journalist who has spent years covering the restaurant industry, its leaders, and the forces shaping its future. We are grateful to have her guiding today's conversation. Joining Alicia are three distinguished panelists. Michelle Korsmo is president and CEO of the National Restaurant Association, the nation's largest food service trade organization, representing and advocating for the restaurant industry. She brings extensive leadership experience in association management, public policy, workforce development, and industry advocacy. Jonathan Mays is editor-in-chief of Restaurant Business Magazine and one of the industry's most influential analysts and commentators. He is known for his deep reporting on restaurant finance, franchising, operations, and emerging trends affecting operators across the country. Rich Shank is senior principal and vice president of innovation at Technomic, one of the leading research and consulting firms serving the food service industry. His work focuses on consumer behavior, menu and concept innovation, and the long-term trends shaping the future of food service. Thank you all for being with us today. And now I'll turn the program over to Alicia Kelso.
Sheila, thanks for having us. I know we appreciate it. And good morning, good Monday morning to everybody. Thanks for joining us. We talk about the state of the restaurant industry. I cannot think of three people more equipped to try and unpack whatever is going on right now. And I know we all spend a lot of time trying to figure out and articulate what is going on. And that for some reason seems more challenging than ever right now. So I want to sort of break the ice on this and put you all on the spots because ideally you'll do a better job trying to articulate what's going on right now than I've been able to do, and ask if you all had to describe the current state of the restaurant industry right now in one sentence, what would it be? And we're, given the context of the organization, we're going to go ladies first and start with you, Michelle.
Thank you, Alicia. So nice to be here with everyone. One sentence to describe is cautiously optimistic, navigating consistent volatility on very thin growth.
Very good,
Did I do that?
Jonathan.
Was that one sentence?
That was great.
Yeah,
Yes. I'll extract more. We've got plenty of time for
we've got
more.
time.
Yeah. So, Jonathan, what about you?
Weird.
Mm.
That
That's
is a
it. It's just
sentence.
weird. You want to know what I think? It's weird. It's a weird
Is
industry. I
that a
think
real
things are.
sentence, Jonathan?
It,
You're a
I'll allow
writer.
yeah,
it.
it's
I'll
one
allow
word.
it.
I don't listen to directions. You know that. Anyway, no, it's weird. Things are unusual.
That's weird.
Things are not acting like they historically do. So I
Okay.
would put it.
And Rich, can you springboard off of weird?
One word are we back to one word? I'd say,
I think
yeah,
you can go for a sentence if you
yeah.
want.
So I mean, I would say it's pretty choppy. I do agree with Michelle. Cautiously optimistic because there are signs in the market where there are some winners, but the choppiness is really, it's not everyone's gaining, right? So.
Okay. I mean, that's a really good place to start. And I appreciate all three of you reiterating that I'm not crazy in my inability to articulate what is going on right now. All of us have been doing this for an awful long time. I'm not going to age anybody on this call, but what is it that is making this environment weird against historical trends in particular, as Jonathan pointed out? I mean, how would you define the choppiness, if you will, Michelle?
So I think first and foremost, in a post-pandemic environment, we've had to really normalize just a complete disruption of supply chain, of trends. The pandemic was a moment in time, but I think it really accelerated what was already happening, and that's a more global world. And so when you think about what people are expecting, what they're looking for is more global. And then this just rise of technology, which has added for restaurants an increased cost, while it's also adding an increased access to consumer and an increased expectation of consumer on how they're delivering. So you've got an uneven supply chain, a global expectation, both of those things requiring businesses to be much stronger at actually running the business to manage that and the margins. And then the increased technology access and weight, right? The cost of the technology, but again, that access of the technology and the weight on the operational efficiency. And all of that means that the professionalism that's required in running the business that is a restaurant has stepped up beyond just the culinary skills.
Yeah, very, very good. Very good way to put that. I mean, Jonathan, how would you build on that if you're able to?
Well, I mean, I think the issue is, I mean, first off, the reason why I call it weird is because you look at fast food traffic over the past couple of years and it's been down. Where in a market like this, where you have a certain amount of consumer pressure, they should be gaining. Top 500 restaurant chain sales were their lowest level, non-pandemic edition, since the Great Recession. And We're net negative if you factor out prices and unit count growth. Um, you have you have record numbers of limited time offers. So you got restaurant chains that are basically throwing literally everything they can to try to get consumers in the door. You just have these weird situations in which one thing just hits and everybody rushes to a restaurant chain at the same time. So you've got situations like Starbucks running out of barista cups. So you have McDonald's running out of socks, which is a sentence I'd never thought I would utter in my entire life. Um, you just have all these weird things that just happen all the time. You just have all of these different factors that are just really creating a lot of havoc in the restaurant space. So that's kind of what I would mean by that, roughly.
Yeah.
It's a different environment, and you have some consumers that are just spending like there's no tomorrow, and you have
Well,
other consumers that are not spending.
and that brings up a good point. And Rich, you swim in this data all day, every day. And the data, to Jonathan's point, which I'll beat that dead horse, I promise you, is weird. Indeed, the economic headlines are contradictory. The National Restaurant Association puts out this data every month. Employment remains relatively strong. And wages are pretty, they're higher than they've been in quite some time, if ever. It, but there's contradictory economic numbers that are coming out. What do you make of, all of these contradictory headlines as it applies to the data that you're seeing?
Yeah, so I mean, we're always looking at different income groups to see how they're behaving in the market, and one of the things we've noticed is, as Jonathan pointed out, there are certain groups not spending, and the lower income consumers actually traded out of the market over 2 years ago. So they reduced their frequency during the last spike in inflation, and that's actually remained relatively stable under the market. So that's kind of given a little bit of a buffer. Like the folks who have really struggled have traded out, but we've stayed at the same baseline with those lower income consumers. When you start going up the scale, when it comes to spending, where a lot of the spending power still resides, right? Like those folks are impacted by very different things. It's not, wage inflation, it's not employment, it's what's going on in the stock market. And we've been seeing, consistently, and that's a weird market right now because historically you don't normally see it behave the way it behaves today. And they're more responsive to their wealth. And so as long as their portfolios are looking good, their kids are going to buy the frogs and the socks from the Dutch Bros and the Starbucks and and stuff like that. So it's definitely, interesting. And one thing, I mean, we've seen some of the traffic choppiness correlated with consumer confidence numbers. And if you look at the two major ones, the Conference Board or the University of Michigan, they're both responsive to different things. Like University of Michigan's is a little bit more sensitive to unemployment, and the employment levels have been relatively stable. I'm sorry, I have it inverse, is more impacted by inflation, and that was actually at a historic low. And if you look at the segments who are low, it's the lower income consumer. There's some partisan divide in people's confidence as well, stuff like that. But that's been, when people's confidence are low, they tend to not take their disposable income to market as fast. But the higher income consumers are, if you go into some pockets of wealthier neighborhoods here in Chicago, it's like none of that's happening.
Mm-hmm. So we've navigated bifurcated economies before in this industry. All of us know that. Why does this one feel different than previous K-shaped economies that we've navigated? And I'm particularly thinking of, 2008, 2009.
I think it's sorry if I'm butting in, but like I think it's just the volume of different weirdness. Like like if you look at the beef market, for example, not only is the supply chain constrained because of the herd size, but now they're dealing with screwworm, which we thought we got rid of. Right. Like those sorts of things, like compounding issues just start to, you think about your own personal life and stress. And it's those like dull stressors that compound year over year that really start to weigh on you. And the market has been feeling those for the last six-ish years, right? And now we have this big news cycle kind of hitting us like waves that impact our confidence and how we behave, right?
Yeah. Michelle, do you have anything to add to that bifurcation question?
No, I think Rich is spot on. I think the other thing is, we see it a lot more now with just our access to information much faster, social channels, etc.
And Jonathan?
No, I mean he said it really well. I mean, I'll just note that like the biggest difference I think between today and what's happened, pretty much any other, in if you go back even to the Great Recession, it's the presence of social media and the impact that that's had. And I think that's created a lot of share trading that's helped kind of
Yeah.
inflate a lot of this. And one of the real things, one of the reasons why I called it weird is just a wide gap in performance that we see sometimes between restaurant chains that are basically competing for the same customer. And you look at, just Burger King, for instance, in the first quarter versus Wendy's, and I think that they had something in the neighborhood of a 13 to 1400 percentage, 13 to 1400 basis point gap in same store sales performance in the first quarter, which really shouldn't happen with those two companies. Essentially means that, people were shifting their spending from Wendy's to Burger King without any question. We see that all over the place. And it's just kind of, I mean, the consumer
Weird.
just has so much, it's weird. And the
Yeah.
consumer is absolutely today picking winners and losers in a way that they've never done before.
Well,
It,
and to that
go ahead.
point, Jonathan, and Alicia, I
Yeah.
think that if you look at just even in your own neighborhood, in my neighborhood, there'll be a bagel shop that is really active on social media
Mhm.
and they have lines out the door. And the bagel shop that's been in the neighborhood for years that has better bagels, if you were going to do a blind taste test, better bagels, but isn't doing the social media, doesn't have the lines. And so that's also where you're seeing that real big distinction.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I think that's really interesting to Jonathan's point. Social media probably impacted the industry more than any of us can possibly
Yeah.
define, and top of mind is so critically important now. And I'm curious, I imagine most of the attendees on this call are, work with independents. So when we talk about, the consumers picking winners and losers in a way they never have before, how does an independent possibly compete in such a top of mind share game with with fewer marketing dollars and fewer smaller brand equity and not enough resources to throw the record number of LTO spaghetti against the wall to get new consumers in? Does anybody have a thought on that?
Well, I think that this is also a bit of an equalizer because the local independent restaurant doesn't have to have national ad dollars in order to put behind a big campaign. And if you think about consumers in our consumer survey, what we find is there's both the comfort desire now for comfort food, but there's also this huge desire for adventure, right? And adventure is finding that local thing, finding that what feels like a real discovery. Ironically, you're finding it with social media where there's hundreds of thousands of followers for that very quiet secret thing. But this is where I think when a restaurant really understands what's its brand value, what is it that it's offering, and then figures out how to drive that through a real presence, I think you're going to see a lot of that. I've seen a lot of independent restaurants do a great job of being a part of local influencers campaigns when they'll do a kind of go around the neighborhood or be like the soccer mom in this neighborhood kind of ad, influencer type content, and the local restaurants do really well. And that's not always a paid influencer environment. Sometimes it could just be the influencers who are already going to your restaurant. There may be more there than you think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll say that, go ahead, Rich.
I was just gonna add the advantage an independent has is when you're online seeking virality or any sort of credibility, the organic nature of their business fits well with the more, kind of unpaid media presence, where if you can get that sort of feel of authenticity coming from, because a lot of big brands are working with influencers and they kind of smack you in the face of this isn't really authentic. Like they don't care about this pillow, right? Like, or whatever. So but if someone's coming in and talking to you about their bagels, in this local shop down the street, it has a feeling of authenticity you can't earn anywhere else. And I do think independents have an advantage in that regard, because they have direct ties to the community. And those influencers that would work with them are going to be the ones that are, I think, a little less hardcore sponsorship focused, right?
I'll take things a step further and I'll tell you that I think that independents have a lot of major advantages in a market like this. First off, because as we talked about, consumers that have money are spending it. And I think a lot of those consumers tend to spend a little bit more broadly than lower income consumers do, and will put their money towards independent restaurants. I think that the consumer fundamentally prefers an independent over a chain restaurant. Again, chain restaurants have a ton of advantages, and fundamentally they can deal with some of the cost concerns that really sort of plague a lot of, well, I mean, actually, a lot of chain restaurants are also struggling these days, but still, they, chain restaurants have more financial wherewithal, but independent consumers love independent restaurants. They absolutely do. And an independent that can really do their job very well in a market like this can turn that into sales with kind of the right thinking when it comes to social media.
Great. One area that I guess concerns is a strong word, but where I do worry about the disparity between chains and independents. And Jonathan, as you mentioned, the financial wherewithal, the scale to absorb, the value that consumers are seeking. We've talked about value. We've written about value more than I care to admit. As discussed, it's a very different conversation than it was when I started covering the industry during the Great Recession. However, it's more of, is this worth it versus what's the lowest price point? How far can you drop the limbo stick? At play, there's still a margin protection issue here. And I'm curious, as Rich pointed out, lower consumers started trading out of the market 2 years ago entirely. And so how do those smaller operators, compete in a tremendously noisy environment that is really monopolized by value? Michelle, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking with our members about this all the time, both the national companies and then those independents that are so important to their neighborhoods. And where I think you see, we're used to the value message for all of the national companies because they put a lot of ad dollars behind that value as part of how they're driving traffic. Local independent restaurants are doing that same thing of determining where their value is. And the best restaurateurs, the best independent restaurateurs I talk to, they know which items on their menu are their value items. They know which of their big, date night protein is their value item. They know which of their wine selection is their value item. And so they're leaning into that and running a lot of really fun special campaigns. There's a great campaign that the Restaurant Association of Metropolitan Washington is running right now called Eat 250. So in advance of the semi-quincentennial, their member companies have all created menus specially designed around kind of this era of the 4th of July and everybody that will be coming to town with all of that activity. And so they've got a menu. It doesn't say value menu on it, but it is a value menu, right? So you're thinking about a fine dining sit-down restaurant, even the more casual dining restaurants, they're putting a value menu out there under this particular brand. And there's a lot of them that are doing that. But again, every restaurant owner, every restaurateur needs to know which are your value items and how are you driving that. The other thing I would add in, because I know that Rich and Jonathan have a lot to add here, but the thing that we're seeing consistently for restaurant operators finding good success with consumers is a price certainty, right? There is a real desire to have a price certainty. If I order, and that's where those kind of prefix value menus come in, the on appetizer level, entree level, dessert level is going to be a set price point. That gets a lot of great response from the consumers, and people go back for it because they know I can spend $25, $45, $75 and I'm going to get this meal.
Jonathan, do you have something to add to that?
Oh yeah. Yeah, frankly. The one thing
Always.
I mean, she's correct. She's absolutely correct on that. Far be it for me to disagree with Michelle Korsmo on anything.
Oh, you didn't
But
disagree with me all day long, Jonathan.
but like,
Conversation.
look, the one thing I'll say about independent restaurants, the last thing they should do is just try to join the low price bandwagon for low price the steak because it doesn't, low price in of themselves ain't working.
Mhm.
It's not really it's one weird, that's why when we get back to what we're talking about, weird year. Rich knows this as well as anybody. It's not just price that's what consumers are going for. It's not strictly price. And the example I'll give, Alicia, you know this very well too. Is McDonald's versus Chili's. And Chili's generated a lot of really strong sales in part by convincing the customer that they're cheaper than McDonald's. Not well, I mean, some of their on social media, they tapped into consumer frustration about price, and they started marketing their 3 for Me platform, which was giving you 3 items for a foundational price of $10.99. Most of those items on that menu are priced above $10.99. That is just the entry point. And fundamentally, Chili's is not cheaper than McDonald's at all. But the consumer looked at that and said, if fast food prices have gotten this high, I'm going to Chili's instead because I might pay a little bit more, but I'm going to get something for what I'm spending. And really, it's about what consumers are getting today for what they're spending. And again, independents have this advantage and they can do things that chain restaurants can't do. Um, because they're chain restaurants and they're beholden to the chain. So they can target their local market with deals that really work that give customers something for what they're going there for. That is really the best thing that they can do to target today's consumer.
Rich.
And yeah, I mean, I think all of that's really well said. I'll just add oftentimes when you hear the word value in public, like the assumption is we're talking about low prices, but when you do research with consumers about what they value and how they value products in general, and you start to try to unpack all the components that play into their value perception, for years, it was always quality at the top, and then you always had service, and then you had price, and then you had sort of like the atmosphere. Now, with things going online, atmosphere has kind of fallen a little bit, and restaurants relationships have got more transactional. So, but what we have seen in the last year and a half is price has gone up over service in terms of the importance, but quality still remains sort of the primary point of differentiation. Um, and so when I start thinking about like how am I going to put value into the market as an independent restaurant, or I would really think about the phrase just surprise and delight, because the what consumers are going to value is something that's surprisingly great. And it doesn't have, it just has to beat their expectation to be a surprise. So like I think Jonathan's point about 10.99 entry point at Chili's, people were surprised that they liked the product at that price point, right? And so it drove interest and they were delighted by it, right? So it really won younger consumers over. They're not even the cheapest casual dining restaurant, right? So their fajitas and their ribs aren't cheap. And they're trying to get you in to buy those things, right? So that foundational price point is something you can drive interest in, but then think about how you can create that element of surprise. If you can't do it with your quality, do it with your service, right?
Right.
And some of that is just individualizing the way you talk to your customers, or giving them special treats and incentives to come back and stuff like that. But I think that's the important thing to think about, is just that idea of you're trying to beat their expectations, and independents are in a strong position to do that just because their quality. And I would caution everyone's dealing with their price increases in their supply chain, from their distributor and their suppliers and things of that nature. But it's very easy to go down the menu engineering route to where you engineer the quality out of your product. And if you're not protecting the quality while you're making ingredient swaps and other things like that to make sure your price points make sense, you could easily get into a downward spiral. And it happens to chains all the time. We're seeing some closing right now because of it.
I appreciate that that context, especially because we are reporting on those closures, and
Yeah.
you jump on social media to try and glean what everybody's saying and the why behind some of these closures, and it always comes back to that, Rich. I want to shift gears a little bit and just kind of ask it. It sounds like the consumer behavior is very much changing at a pace that's more rapid than ever. We know that that is, driven in part because of social media, digital, our interconnectivity, the information age. I want to understand what consumer trends that you guys think are changing, perhaps impacting the restaurant industry, the most in the past maybe 2 or 3 years of let's take the pandemic and the ensuing year or two after that out of this and look at like 2023 on when things have been really wonky, and explain what you think, what consumer behavior has had the most impact on the environment. Rich, I'm going to start with you since you have a
Yeah.
hot mic.
I think you go back to the social media landscape and how it's changed the way consumers behave. It's also changing what counts as a trend and how long it lasts and things of that nature. I think the churn for trends has gotten faster, and their impact has gotten greater. It's also harder to predict, right? 'Cause we know what's growing on menus. You just don't know like who in the world thought Dubai had chocolate, right? And then all of a sudden there's not enough pistachios in the world to cover that,
Yeah.
and so like those things are hard to predict. And so like if you start to see products in your category kind of ticking up in that sort of virality moment, I would jump on the wave and figure out if you can't, turn your place into one of those SNL sketches about big dumb lines, right? But it's just it's hard to predict, right? And if you go back to longer term trends, we're seeing a big influx of international flavors enter the market. Which ones become the moment are hard to predict. We just know they keep ticking up on menus, especially Asian inspired flavors, in particular. Younger consumers have a much broader palate than people are, our age in general. And they're not afraid to go try stuff.
Yeah, Rich, I live with an 11-year-old, and I can tell you that the stuff that he comes up with to eat,
Yeah.
it should be the stuff of test kitchens. It's
Yeah. Well,
very bizarre.
we're gonna have to he's gonna have to start it up, and we'll start. It'll be the next big test
Yeah.
kitchen house. There you go.
Yes. And along the lines of Dubai and its chocolate, did you know that some menus also have protein?
Oh,
Yeah,
what?
a little bit. I had
Whoa, whoa.
protein in my noodles the other day. So yeah.
Michelle, what are your thoughts on, or from your perspective or your unique, perspective where you're sitting, what
Yeah,
consumer trends have had the most impact?
yeah, I mean, for sure, all of the flavor trends that we're talking about, but I don't know how we talk about consumer trends and we don't talk about off-premise as a huge trend that has been just a massive shift in the way the business happens. More than a third of all meals now, industry-wide, so taking out quick service as its own, but industry-wide, are consumed off-premise. And then within off premise, you've got delivery and third party delivery. But just to think about the fact that that much of the menu of a restaurant is consumed off premise, I think is dramatic.
Yeah, I'm glad you
And I
pointed that
think it's
out.
we're still not at the point where we figured out how that off premise works for profitability for restaurants. And that continues to change. It's difficult to manage through with third party. It's difficult to think about which platforms to be on, what kind of advertising to do, how you're handling it for your first party delivery. There's a lot in that off premise environment.
Yeah, toggling on and off during peak hours is my nemesis too. If we're gonna
Yep.
talk about how to figure that out, that could be a whole other conversation on how independents can level the playing field, though we talk about social media and all that. But if there's one thing about off premise, it's that it has been able, it has allowed a lot of independents to gain that share of voice on the platforms that consumers are increasingly going to. Jonathan, what are your thoughts on consumer trends?
Well, I will simply say both Rich and Michelle are absolutely correct. Off premise is a big deal. Delivery is absolutely creating some issues with the business model of restaurants that are challenging for many operators today. And social media, I mean, what it's done to demand and the supply chain is actually really insane. But I'll mention beverages. Probably, I would argue the biggest product trend today, and frankly, one of the more positive product trends today is the broadening and deepening of customized beverages inside restaurants. You have the fastest growing restaurant chain in the United States is a company called Seven Brew, which did not exist in 2017. It is already the fourth largest coffee chain in the United States. Seven Dutch Bros, which is essentially its rival, is the third largest, and most of that growth has happened over the past few years. You've got a lot of restaurant companies that are broadening their selection of drinks, whether it's something like Whataburger adding beverages. You've got companies adding boba teas. You've got this category of refreshers that nobody even heard of a few years ago. Now everybody seems to have them, and nobody knows exactly what it is. Alicia, I'm sure that your 11-year-old drinks a lot different beverages than you did, because
Yep.
my kids drink so much nonsense. I can't even describe half of the flavors. I don't know what they are. And they just make me feel old. But the fact of the matter is, a younger consumer today is drinking a wider variety of drinks. They want more customization. They want energy drinks, actually going to be huge in the restaurant industry. Last week, much to my surprise, Michelle's organization came out with a statement on THC beverages, which I never thought I would see the day. You got non-alcoholic beverages that are taken off. Consumers are drinking less alcohol and are shifting to non-alcoholic drinks, and restaurants are getting more innovative on alcohol-free cocktails, all sorts of stuff. It is actually pretty remarkable, and probably a long time coming.
Yeah, yeah, I'm here for it. I'm sure most operators are too because of the higher margins. But I want to make sure that we have some time for Q&A. So I want to sort of tidy this conversation up in a bow with an abrupt shift over to the business side. I've been very curious because we've talked a lot about the middle of the P&L more than I have in my 17 years covering this industry. We know food, labor, and rent costs are higher. Now we're starting to talk about, hey, operators, don't forget to look at the middle of the P&L because this food and labor and rent costs are kind of out of our control. The genie's out of the bottle. So what are you doing to sort of, optimize and make sure that you're efficient in that middle of the P&L? And several folks I've talked to have, told their operators to be more mindful of that when weirdly they haven't before. Things like energy costs and everything else, insurance costs. We've talked about swipe fees here and elsewhere, and I'm sure folks on this call are very interested in that conversation. But I'm curious to know, from a business standpoint, what is the biggest challenge, if you could glean a biggest challenge in this entire weird environment? Because we know that 43% of operators last year said they weren't profitable. And I want to start with you, Michelle, because you've got that unique perspective. What would you consider to be the biggest challenge that operators should be paying attention to from the business side of things?
Oh, I'm curious
I
about
think
this
it's,
one.
oh boy,
Not
this is an
THC.
easy question, Alicia.
Okay.
Easy question. you kind of hate to say that you're in an environment where you have to get everything right, but I think that this isn't an environment where you have to get everything right. And that's why you're paying attention to the middle of the P&L. People weren't really noticing, and all of a sudden your insurance costs have edged up 140 to 300% in some cases, depending on where you are. That gets to be a lot. It is why we care so much and are talking so much about swipe fees and what that does, because it's 3 to 5% at times of an expense line for restaurants, and they're paying those swipe fees on taxes that they're collecting. For all of the international people that are watching, particularly everybody in the EU, your American friends are envious of your marketplace and how low your swipe fees are with safe digital transactions. So there is a model out there to have lower costs in terms of swipe fees. But again, you gotta, unfortunately, to run a restaurant today, you've got to get it all right. It's not enough just to be a fantastic chef with the most amazing meal and menu. I mean, that used to be almost enough to draw people and keep everybody in. But now you've got to manage your labor costs well. You've got to manage your, like you said, the middle of the P&L. You've got to get your social media presence right. All of those things have to work, and it requires, even when you're a small independent restaurant, a little bit more sophistication in what you bring to the business side of running a restaurant.
Yeah. So
And she hit it out of the park with the answer.
what would be your piece of
I
advice?
said everything. That's why, Jonathan, I hit it all.
What would be your piece of advice for folks on this call to become more sophisticated? Because I'm sure a lot of people in this industry, my late father included, got into the industry because of the passion for food and service, not because they wanted to navigate the middle of the P&L.
Right. And that's where, it takes a team. One of the things I love, I remember when my kids were little and I just started in the association, I took them to one of our national Pro Start Invitational competitions where you're watching these high school kids make these amazing meals. And it's such a beautiful story about teamwork. Right? Everything that happens in a restaurant happens because there's teamwork going on. And I think the same is true for how the business side of the restaurant works. You need a team. If you're a great chef, a great culinarian, that's fantastic. If running a P&L isn't your thing, you've got to find somebody who's really good at that and think of them as teams responsible for and in charge of delivering on their particular element.
Very good. And Rich, from your perspective, what would you consider to be, the biggest challenge that operators need to be mindful of, and what would be your takeaway piece of advice to manage that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm absolutely agree with that, with what Michelle just said. I'm trying to think of something slightly different to kind of add in terms of a solution there. I think, obviously, I think if you are someone who's self-managing a restaurant and you're in the kitchen and in the books, you have to figure out how to delegate which one of those two things you want to do and invest the time and money into getting it right, because you probably will save a little money in the end if you have to hire an additional hand to help you in the kitchen so that you can focus on negotiating with your insurance companies or those sorts of things. I do think that's going to be important in thinking about how you structure your team. I also think if you're thinking about that next unit, doing a few things. One is it may not be the cheapest unit that's going to be your most successful, right? Like you might need to invest in a place that has slightly higher rent, better visibility to draw in as much traffic as you can, right? One thing we do see is a dynamic when we're working with restaurants who are looking to expand, especially into other states. They tend to gravitate to what they think are lower cost states, but then they get hit with things like insurance, swipe fees, all sorts of things that actually make their unit economics less favorable than they appear. And so I would definitely do the math on all of those things as you're considering new units. It's not always the cheapest place that's going to generate the best revenue and profit in particular. So making sure that you have a really strong estimate of how many people are going to come through the door at each of those locations, I think are important as you're considering. Just going to the cheapest location may not, based on rent and based on labor, isn't the solution anymore. You really have to look at the whole P&L to make sure that it fits your unit economics going forward.
Very good. And Jonathan?
I can't really top what these guys said. I will simply say that, employee experts and know what the heck they're doing. And I will simply say, I mean, this really goes to what Michelle had to say. It's why I liked it so much. We have, and I think I've told you this story, Michelle. Young Joni in Northeast Minneapolis
Oh,
was
yeah.
one of the most popular restaurants in town. And I'm not kidding. It was hard to get a reservation anytime soon. Beard nominated chef, amazing menu. Everything seemed to work. Super hot neighborhood that was growing. And then they had to close down, even though they were full every single night. And the reason why they had to close down is because that the landlord had a lease provision that enabled that landlord to increase their rent, essentially doubling their rent. So
Mhm.
when Michelle talks about, it's just that it's everything that can hurt a restaurant. That's exactly what happens. You have to make sure that everything is you just that's why using experts, making sure that all of these little things are taken care of, because you just never know it's going to come back and bite you later on down the line.
Well, and we
A whole
should take this
series of
moment
that
too.
dynamic.
It's so right, and that's why Le Dames d'Escoffier, the media that you're reading, joining and being active in your state restaurant association, like all of those things where you're sharing information and learning new things. Like you've got to learn it early enough in the process to be able to influence the outcome, and you do that by engaging with the industry.
Very good. I want to invite the attendees to add a question in the chat if they are so willing or if they are so curious to do so, and I'll manage that. The chat, I believe, is on the right-hand side of your Zoom screen. And I will read them as they come in. We are getting close on the end of time, but until I start getting questions, I'm going to keep going, and I hope you are all okay with that. But I want to, I think it's, I want to understand sort of the labor dynamic, because, the labor environment is also kind of weird right now, and the unemployment levels are weird, and what we see mass headlines of mass layoffs. We see the AI revolution is coming to take all of our jobs away. Just some doomsday kind of stuff. But the restaurant industry has relatively been insulated from some of that, but we've seen a little bit of a downturn on that. And Michelle, because the association keeps such a strong pulse on the industry's workforce, I want to lob this question to you specifically. What does how are our workforce issues in this industry? Is this a concern for you compared to historical trends?
So concerned about AI taking over the workforce of the restaurant industry. The answer is no. We know that the best restaurants are always ones that have, the phrase I use is high tech, high touch, right? So you need to have that technology component to what you're doing. But if you lose the high touch, we lose what's fantastic about restaurants. And even, this is every restaurant, quick service restaurants. I love the quick service restaurants where you're ordering from the kiosk, and then what's happening is somebody's bringing you your meal. So it's not that kind of environment where they've eliminated the workforce. It's just they put the workforce in an environment to provide a higher level of personal engagement. And at the same time, they're getting better accuracy, better response times, higher check averages by using a kiosk. I do think that there is a tremendous amount of business intelligence, insight, and work that can come from utilizing AI well in the restaurant industry. So I think that there has to be an engaged AI strategy that businesses are bringing to looking at analytics, understanding traffic and menu optimization. There's a lot that can happen through AI to improve your business, but it won't detract from your existing workforce. I think it will make you more efficient, more profitable, hopefully.
Very good. And don't fear the AI, just know what it can do for you.
That's right.
I would add, don't use it just to use it, right?
Yeah.
Uh, we do have a question in the chat. My husband and I will be opening a tiki bar in the next few weeks, not a beach bar, but immersive decor, fresh pressed juices and syrups made in-house. And we are planning to do a strong social push. Abby, I would love to know where this is. Any advice for us at this point as we launch? Rich, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean I think if you're I mean I'm not sure what the menu looks like, but just making sure you have a comprehensive tiki inspired menu that you can execute on. And then as you're starting to make social media push, just working through and creating local connections with people that have influence, and so sometimes uh, I think people tend to over rely on certain types of sort of sponsorships and things through social media, and actually meaning like sponsored ads and things that don't, you're kind of paying for views. There's not, like you're going to get more engagement if you can find organic connections in the community that'll help you promote your opening. Right. So, and that might mean creating events that could kind of coincide with the soft launch or the opening that will draw other crowds in. Right. And so if you can just leverage those networks internally in your local community, the more the better.
Mhm. Jonathan?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that what Rich said was fantastic because you're the people in your community are the ones that you're going to want to come in on a regular basis, and they're going to be the ones that push it out. Don't be afraid to be when it comes to social media. Don't be afraid to be a little creative. Start working on it now, because social media is how people discover restaurants. It's how they get their news. It's how they get a lot of other things, like it or hate it. It's really important with the way consumers use it. And I just go back to what I said earlier. Make sure you're tapping into the experts. Pay attention to the lease agreements. Pay attention to all these little things that can really eat you, and then be flexible.
Mhm.
Another
Michelle?
important.
The other thing I would say is start now. I mean,
Yeah.
you're talking about this pressed juices and syrups and the tiki atmosphere. I was getting excited. I think, if you're thinking about the launch, get that launch buzz going fast and find other influencers that are in your neighborhood that you really like and think are hitting your demographic. And then go to those influencers and talk about what you're doing and help them be in on the inside.
All right.
Success has many fathers, right?
Very good. Appropriate the day after Father's Day,
Yes,
too,
the day
I might
after Father's Day.
add. Meg brings up a good point. It's not a question so much, but it is one that can easily springboard into a question that AI won't be able to cook for us. But as people lose their jobs and as we're starting to see they lose that discretionary income, I have seen countless headlines on where do we get our what happens to our income when we start losing our jobs. So, I does this does this mean it's going to stay weird? I mean, the way that, the environment is going, especially the employment environment, are we going to see a continued bifurcation? Is this weirdness going to linger, that in the same way that kind of inflation has lingered, kind of an uncomfortable amount of time? Jonathan, you're vigorously nodding your head, so I'm starting
Yeah,
with
because
you.
I don't think that the economy works for everybody. I don't. I really, I'm kind of there. And really, until we get like half of the population would be considered lower income. And so, you still have a large number of Americans that feel they can't afford everyday stuff. Their rent is high, their education costs are high, their insurance costs are high. It costs a lot of money to buy a car in this country right now. It costs them a lot of money to do roughly everything, and it has really hurt lower income consumers. And they just don't have as much money to spend. And the U.S. restaurant industry is fundamentally saturated. So the U.S. restaurant industry today needs everybody doing well to make this industry what it can be. We shouldn't be talking about a lot of these things because the consumer should be doing a lot better than they are today. So really, until we get get to an economy that is working for that particular group of lower income and younger consumers, we're probably going to be dealing with a lot of these same things. That's what I think.
Rich, do you agree with that, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I do. I tend to agree just because we're entering unprecedented times when it comes to labor. There's folks, if you look at analysts in the labor market, some of them don't necessarily believe that the reason these layoffs are happening is because directly AI are taking jobs, and so some do, right? So it's like we don't exactly know what the full impact is even now of what some of these news cycles are. So we have no real way of understanding what it's going to do to employment over the long term. And so that's one thing that I think introduces uncertainty. And if these layoffs are a trend, and I think it's early innings to know if it's going to be sustainable, then it's certainly impacting technology jobs right now. And those were, high six-figure jobs, right? So we may not be creating up the upper middle class wealth that we were over the last decade and a half because of that, which would then impact some of the higher end of the market. Specifically right now, it's not necessarily doing that because it's the healthiest part of the market, but it certainly, I think, introduces a lot of uncertainty we don't know how to manage or deal with. And a lot of that's going to introduce policy problems that we're currently not equipped to solve either. So it's just, long term, we have to see where it goes.
Very good. Michelle, I'm going to ask the last question to you, but first I want to answer a quick question in the chat, if I may. What 3 social media channels are best right now for restaurant operators? What would you guys say?
I mean, I would start with TikTok and go down the list, right? Probably TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat.
Facebook.
Depends on,
Facebook.
I think, well, here's a great way to use AI. I would find your favorite AI and then talk about your restaurant and who your target demographic is and ask the AI what social media platforms your target demographic is on. Because I'm surprised how many of my friends are doing things based on what's on LinkedIn. But I don't know if that's the tiki or the tiki bar target market, but it may be. I mean, if you're looking for those people that are dreaming about retirement and going and having a great fruity beverage with an umbrella in it, that may be the LinkedIn group. So ask AI to help you with that.
Good point. Know your consumer, know where the consumers are on social media. Abby, I am looking toward retirement at some point in my life, so I would like to know where that tiki bar is. If you can let us know in the chat. We are at almost at the end. As promised, I want to end with you, Michelle. There's some ominous information. There's some weird isn't necessarily completely negative, but weird. We don't want to be ignorant of some of the challenges that have really been relentless and persistent throughout the past couple of years. So I want to end with you, but looking ahead to the next 12 to 18 years. I know you opened the conversation with cautious optimism, but I want to understand what gives you the greatest optimism despite it all.
I actually am optimistic. I'm optimistic by nature, so I'm optimistic all the time. I hope not kind of Pollyanna-ish about it all, but think about the history of restaurants. I started So I lead trade associations. I started here at the National Restaurant Association in 2022. So we were really kind of coming out of such a brutal time. And I was having conversations, I mean, with Jonathan and others about like Janie's, right? These fantastic restaurants that people love, that after some of those restaurant relief fund dollars dried up, just couldn't keep it going based off of the increased prices and some of the changes. And I get really sad about these beautiful restaurants that people brought to life. But when I stopped to listen, the next sentence was always, so now we're going to start this new thing, and now we're going to try this new thing. There is something so wonderfully entrepreneurial and optimistic about a restaurateur and anybody that goes into this industry. When one concept doesn't work, one location doesn't work, they learn what wasn't working and they lean in and start it again. And I think as long as we have a business operating environment where the ability to pick up and start again exists, that's part of what we're working on at the National Restaurant Association, is to make sure that the operating environment is as hospitable as possible to restaurants, because restaurateurs reimagine and create new all the time. It's part of what they do. And I think that's why the future is bright.
Very good. I amen to that. That is a perfect note to end on. Let's end on a high note. And thank you for bringing us home. Sheila, back over to you. I hope there you are. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia. As we conclude today's program, I'd like to extend our sincere thanks to you, Alicia Kelso, for expertly moderating this discussion, and to Michelle Korsmo, Jonathan Mays, and Rich Shank for sharing their insights, expertise, and perspectives on the restaurant economy today. The restaurant industry is one of the most dynamic sectors of our economy, and today's conversation has given us a deeper understanding of both the challenges and opportunities facing operators, workers, suppliers, and consumers. We are grateful to our panelists for helping us better understand the forces shaping the industry in real time. Thank you as well to all of you who joined us today and contributed your thoughtful questions and comments. We hope you will continue the conversation with us on July 28th from 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern Time for the third and final installment of our restaurant series, The Bigger Picture: Structural Forces Reshaping Hospitality. In part 3, we'll step back from today's headlines to examine the larger forces transforming hospitality, including workforce trends, sustainability, the workplace culture, technology, public policy, demographic shifts, and changing consumer expectations. Please save the date and watch for registration information coming soon. On behalf of Les Dames d'Escoffier International and the Live Online Committee, thank you for being with us today. We look forward to see you again on July 28th. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.